Peleus, who was the young king of Thessaly, had been given the beautiful Nereid Thetis for his bride by Zeus. All of the gods had been invited to the wedding, all except for Eris, the spirit of strife. She was so angry that while everyone was having fun, she threw a golden apple into the crowd and shouted that the fairest among the goddesses shall have it. Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena ran to pick it up, each one thinking that they were the most beautiful. Yet it was not the golden apple of love that Eris had thrown, but the apple of discord. The three goddesses began to fight, and the wedding broke up on a bad note. Thetis was not happy that her husband was mortal, because that would mean her children would not be immortal. No god had dared to marry her because an oracle had predicted that she would bear her husband a child that would be stronger than its father. Although Peleus thought himself the most lucky of mortal men. In time, Thetis had many children for her husband. Each one she tried to make immortal by holding them over the sacred fire to burn away their mortality, but none of them survived the ordeal. Finally, she gave birth to a boy who was much stronger than the others. He withstood the fire and was about to become immortal when Peleus rushed in and took the child away. Thetis was so upset that she went back into the sea and never returned. The little boy was brought up by Chiron, the wise centaur, and he grew up to be one of the greatest warriors Greece has ever seen. His name was Achilles, and he was invulnerable except for his heel, which his mother held over the fire. Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena continued to argue about who was the most beautiful. But one day, as Zeus looked down on earth, he saw Paris, a prince of Troy. He was exceedingly handsome, as most men were of Troy. His granduncle Ganymede was so handsome that Zeus had turned into an eagle and captured him, making him his cupbearer. Anchises, another relative of Paris, was so handsome that Aphrodite herself had fell in love with him and took the shape of a princess so that she could marry him, and she bore him a son whose name was Aeneas. But Paris was more handsome than all of his relatives, and someone this handsome should be a good judge of beauty. Zeus told Hermes to go down to Paris and tell him to judge the three goddesses. Paris stared in wonder as the three goddesses stood before him. Hermes gave him the golden apple and told him to award it to the most beautiful of the three. "Give it to me," said Hera, "and all of Asia shall be your kingdom." "Choose me," said Athena, "and you shall be the wisest of men." "The most beautiful woman on earth shall be yours, if you give me the apple," said Aphrodite. Paris was young, and he valued beauty more than wisdom or power, so he gave the apple to Aphrodite. Aphrodite took the apple and showed him Helen, the queen of Sparta, who was already married. Helen was the daughter of Zeus, and her beauty had been reveled in since the day she was born. Zeus had flown down to earth in the disguise of a swan to court her mother Leda, and Leda had laid 2 blue eggs, one of which birthed Helen and her brother Pollux, who were immortal, and the other birthed their half-sister and brother Clytemnestra and Castor, who were the children of King Tyndareus, Leda's mortal husband. Helen and Clytemnestra grew up with their father King Tyndareus, and Clytemnestra was soon given to Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae. But Helen had so many suitors that Tyndareus feared for his life, because if he gave her hand to one suitor, the other might attack him. Among the suitors was Odysseus, the wise prince. When he saw the suitors, he took away his proposal because he knew Helen would always be fought over. He asked for the hand of Penelope, Helen's cousin. He gave advice to King Tyndareus how to solve his problem. King Tyndareus must ask all the suitors to accept the one he chose for Helen as her husband, and then to swear to stand by him and help win her back should anyone try and steal her. All the suitors agreed, and he chose King Menelaus of Sparta. Helen was the queen of Sparta for many happy years. The Trojans begged Paris to forget about the promise, because they were sure something terrible would happen to them if he went and fell in love with Helen. Paris ignored all these warnings and sailed across the sea to Helen. Helen sat serene and happy in Sparta, but when Paris arrived, Eros shot an arrow of love into her heart, and she immediately eloped with him to Troy. Menelaus, not a man to stand by while his wife was being taken, reminded all the suitors of their old oath, and they joined him with all their warriors to attack Troy and get Helen back. Troy was surrounded by a high wall built by Apollo and Poseidon, and after a long talk they decided that it would be better if Paris and Menelaus fought in single combat, and then Helen would go to whoever won. Paris was not a warrior, though. He preferred to rest and stay in comfort than to fight. But during the battle, Aphrodite came to his rescue and hid him in the cloud. But since they could not find Paris, the duel was undecided, and the two armies clashed together. For 10 years the Greeks and Trojans fought over Helen. The gods watched with great interest. Some even took part in the fighting. Hera and Athena, who were still mad at Paris for not giving them the apple, fought on the Greek side, even though Athena was a protectress of Troy. Ares fought wherever the battle was most intense, but when he was wounded, he frightened both armies with his howls. Aphrodite herself even entered the battle, just to help Paris. She was also wounded, though. Finally, Zeus had to order all the gods to stop fighting. They sat on the walls of Troy and watched the mortals fight the battle for themselves. Many heroes were killed on both sides of the war, but the Greeks could not get into Troy without destroying their high walls, and the Trojans could not defeat the Greeks as long as Achilles fought for them. Even though Paris was not a great marksman, fate had chosen him to kill the great hero Achilles. Apollo ran to Paris' side and guided his hand as he drew his bow. The arrow hit Achilles right in his vulnerable spot, the heel, and mortally wounded, he fell to the ground and died. The Greeks mourned the loss of their great hero Achilles. They eventually took revenge on Paris, and he was killed by one of the poisoned arrows that Heracles had given to Philoctetes. After this, the Greeks, feigning retreat, boarded their ships and pretended to sail away. They left a big wooden horse, and the Trojans, thinking that this was a gift to Poseidon, pulled it into their city. But it was a trick. The horse was hollow and filled with Greek soldiers. In the night they crept out and opened the city gates. The Greeks were hiding behind the island, and now they came through the gates and razed the city of Troy. Helen was brought back to Sparta, and the only one remaining of the royal house of Troy was Aeneas, his father, and his young son. They would wander around until eventually Aeneas would found the great city of Rome.